Looks like most of you have been out of school for a couple of years. And I understand that a lot of you forgot how to count from 1 to 10. Is that right? How many of you can count from 1 to 10? All right, I don't believe you. You count with me from 1 to 10. Let's go. Ichi ni san shi go roku sechi hachi kuju. Not a one of you helped me. Oh. Of course, what? That's Japanese, counting from 1 to 10. And but I wanted to check up on you to see if you knew how to count from 1 to 10. But my experience has started in 1941 in March when I went into the service of the United States Army. I was sent down to El Paso, Texas, and put in the 200th Coast Artillery anti-aircraft, and which was a National Guard from the state of New Mexico. And I was one of the few that was not from the state of New Mexico when I went into the outfit. We went overseas in September of 1941 with at Clarkville, and actually at Fort Schotzenburg, which is right next to Clarkville, and we were to protect Clarkville. And we went out there and started digging our foxholes first part of November. And, oh, we've got them down maybe that 4. And, of course, at that time, they let us have every other day off. Half of the platoon would have the day off to go either washing their clothes, writing letters, and so forth and so on. But all of us had to stay overnight out on the field in pup tents, 2 men to a pup tent. And the night, well, the 8th of December, now you're going to say I'm a day ahead of you. I am, because I was across the international date line. And I was on guard duty the last watch from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock in the morning. And I was looking forward to coming off day watch and holler, "Rise and shine." And so the other, I was supposed to get that day off. And so the other half went in for breakfast. It was going to stay out in the field. They came back, they had the most fantastic story you ever heard. They said Pearl Harbor's been bombed. We said, yeah, wait till tomorrow morning. We'll have something even greater than that. Well, of course, we went in and we found out Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And so then we came back out in the field and we was out digging our foxholes, and we got them maybe that deep. But about 11:30, the sergeant said, "Robinson, you can go in and lay down and rest just a moment, or for about a half hour, and then you're supposed to say Smith and Sanders in, get the noon meal." And so I went in, laid down my pup tent. For the first time in my life that I can ever remember, I went to sleep in the daytime. And I awoke as a truck was pulling away. And I was pretty disgusted because I was going to miss out on a hot meal, bring out to the rest. About that time we looked in the air, and here came 54 heavy bombers, 2 flights of 27 each. We said, "Oh good, look, here comes the Navy." It wasn't the Navy. But anyway, almost, the belly of those planes are turning from white to black. I wonder why. Some of you that were in combat know why. Because the bombs were falling. And after the bombers had gone over, then the dive bombers came in, pursuit planes and so on, about 75 of them. And I knew one pilot had been in the United States, because when he went over our position, he went like that. That's only an American thing at that time anyway. But anyway, the raid was over, our commanding officer came out and we said, "Captain Reardon, Smith and Sanders haven't come back." And then he told us, he said, "One bomb hit the left front fender, another bomb hit the left front, at the side door, right side door. Blew the truck completely to pieces, killed both men instantly. By the grace of God, I was not on that truck." And as I think of the trenches, I think of the 23rd Psalm. I thought every verse of that fulfilled to the very letter. And at that time I said, "Lord, by your grace, I will make it back, because usually there's a survivor to everything. And then our platoon 50 caliber machine gun was worthless along the edge of the field because our Air Force was caught on the field at Clark Field. Here's something you'll never read. About 7:30 that morning, the B-17s took off at Clark Field. They went in the air. They started returning about 11:30. As they started returning, landing, the last three of those planes saw the Japanese were bombing the field, and they went on down into Mindanao, and from Mindanao on to Australia. The only way I found that out was there was a man named Casper who was a tail bomber on one of those planes. And he's the one that told me about his experiences going on down. But you'll never read that in the paper. Our planes could have caught the planes at Formosa at that time. The Japanese originally intended simultaneously to bomb Singapore, Hong Kong, Clark Field, and Pearl Harbor. And then we went out, our platoon of 50 caliber machine guns were put to Battery B, 3-inch gun battery, and we were the orphans basically. The 3-inch would move, and then they'd send one truck back to get our platoon of machine gun. And we gradually moved back, and then on New Year's Eve we went into Bataan. Went down on Bataan, then our semi-position down there was in a banana plantation. And I met the Filipino that was in charge of it. When we was on Bataan, I was in charge of the planes, checking the planes, and I was the only one that could override our lieutenant, and which I did one time. When planes came in, I would recognize what kind they were, but I spent most of the time scouting, basically scouting for food, looking for Japanese ciphers also. But this Filipino showed me what we could eat and what we should not eat there on Bataan. And then he would sell me bananas for a half a cent a piece, and I'd sell them to my platoon for the same amount. And when the surrender came, my platoon was in about the best shape of anyone, because when we went on Bataan, our rations were cut in half. 1st of February, they were cut to a fourth. So you can imagine how little food we had that was coming out there. But the biggest insult of all was one time our cooks started hollering because we were fed before sundown up and after sundown, and it was in the evening, and what happened? During our chow line, a couple of Japanese snipers had gone through our chow line, and they were washing their mess kits in our water, but they, of course, went into the jungle. The jungle was an interesting place. When we first went back to that semi-position, I started to dig my foxhole, and I went up like that, fortunately, later on, because there was a limb of that tree that was about 6 inches from my face. As I would go down, it would go down. When I would come up, it would come up. And finally, my brain began to think, limbs of trees don't do that. Fortunately, I stepped back instead of raising my arm up like that, and there was a viper. I stepped back. He crawled out of the tree because he had seniority. And so these were some of the things that happened, and it was interesting doing some scouting work there. We'd be going down the jungle, about as close as you and I are together. I was in the lead, and a friend of mine was behind me. We'd be walking along the jungle, and all once someone would say, "Hello, Joe," and in between us would be a Negrote. A Negrote is a native in the Philippines of the jungle, and had just a loincloth and a bolo. Some of you know what a bolo is, a knife about so long. And fortunately, he was our friend. They took the side, because when the Japanese went into the jungle, they found out they did not send 1 or 2 men in the jungle by themselves. Otherwise, they ended up with divided personality. That is, their head and bodies are separated. But anyway, this was my scouting work down there in the jungle, and then the day before the surrender of Bataan, the position that I was in was dive bombed 10 different times. And I had one bomb hit within 10 feet of the foxhole I was in. The crater came up to the edge of the foxhole I was in. In that foxhole, I had all of the 50 caliber machine gun ammunition. When we went back on Bataan, we had a lieutenant that went back to Clark Field before they blew Clark Field up and stole a lot of ammunition. And then he said, don't tell all this illegal ammunition. And so I kept track of how much legal and illegal ammunition we had. And so when our guns would fire, maybe we'd fire, say, like 400 rounds, and he'd say, Robinson, take 100 rounds off of our legal and the rest off of our illegal. I said, okay. One day, we had several Japanese attacks come in today. He said, Robinson, take the others off of our illegal. But when he said 250 that we fired from headquarters, they said, say, save your ammunition. Don't waste it. Our lieutenant said, sir, one of the men held up a match and lit it on the wing of the plane. Now, how much closer should we get? Needless to say, the phone went dead. But that was some of the things that we ran into back there. And but the night before, day before, when they 10 different times that Japanese came in, the lieutenant came to me, my platoon, the captain of B battery came to me and said, Robinson, go through to headquarters and find out what our orders are, and then come back, and you may have to lead us out. But when I went back a truck had got in and got them out, but I went around and I checked the main plate, the back plate and the main spring of each gun, and to destroy them, to make sure the Japanese could not use them. And then as it was breaking dawn, I was going down the west side of Cabin Field, and the Japanese were lighting the little fires to have a little food for their breakfast. I went back, and then about mid-morning, our lieutenant called us. He said, stack your rifles and come up here and see me for a moment. When we went up, he said, I have bad news to tell you. So Bataan has been surrendered by General King. He went forward, and we are now prisoners of the Japanese. But at that time, 3 Japanese tanks came across, and then we went up to Cabin Field. About noon, after the Japanese were shelling Corregidor behind it, Corregidor, when they fired back, I had shells landed close enough to raise welts on my arm. But we hit through the road, started out, and I was in the first group that started out on Bataan Death March. As we would march the first day with the Japanese guns, we were having to push them up the hill. They would hit us with rifle butts, sticks, rocks, and so on, call us Heitai Horio. And one time a Japanese non-com took about a dozen of us, lined us up along the edge of a bluff, and his squad took their rifles, threw shells into the rifle, threw one into the barrel, came up to their shoulder, and about that time a Japanese officer yelled something, I don't know what it was, but they told us to beat it on down the road. We did not ask for a second opinion. But going there, Japanese stopped me, and he searched me. He took my New Testament, which I had in my pocket. The day before, my heart felt hot. I pulled my shirt out. Between my New Testament and me was a chunk of shrapnel. Believe me, shrapnel is hot. But anyway, he threw my New Testament on the ground. I reached down, picked it up, dusted it off, stuck it in my pocket. I looked at him. He looked at me. He was on a curve of road. He looked up and down the road. At that moment, there were no Americans or Japanese. He turned and walked toward Corregidor, and then I began to tremble, because many a man lost his life for a lot less than that. because I caused him to lose face. But we went on, and from San Fernando, they put us in boxcars, some narrow gauge boxcars, 100 men to a boxcar, and took us up into Capas to go on out to O'Donnell. And we were so crowded in the boxcars that if a man died, he stood, he kept standing. There's no place for him to fall. Coming out on the march, the Japanese did not feed us or give us water. Many men swooped down to get a little bit of water in their mouth. And many of them died then from dysentery when we went to prison camp. A Japanese, a Navajo Indian in my outfit said, get a gumball, a rock about the size of a gumball, put it in your mouth, because that'll keep the saliva moving in your mouth, and you won't notice a thirst. And that is what we did. The water that I had coming out on the marsh was the water that the Filipinos rest of their life until sugar cane to us, and we would suck the water out of the sugar cane, and that was the water I had to drink. We was at O'Donnell about 6 weeks. It was the longest 6 weeks of my life. About 7,000, and I do not know the actual number, but around 7,000 of us made it into O'Donnell. Out of that, in 6 weeks, 1,700 had died. Then they took us to Cabanatuan. Cabanatuan, the conditions were somewhat better. I spent most of my time in the hospital, and I'll mention those things later on. But there at Cabanatuan, food was a little bit better than before. Before, all we had was moldy rice, and this was rice that we had at